"Ma'am, place your hands where I can see them." The words cut through the polished silence of the bank like a blade no one expected, sharp enough to turn heads, quiet enough to make people listen. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, reflecting off marble floors and glass counters. But in that moment, everything felt still, like the air itself had paused to watch what would happen next. Officer Daniel Hayes stood tall in the center of the lobby, one hand resting near his belt, the other gesturing firmly toward the woman in front of him. His voice carried authority, practiced and confident, the kind that didn't expect to be questioned. Across from him stood Monica Carter, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She didn't move, not an inch. Around them, a small crowd had already begun to gather, drawn in by the tension the way people always are. A man near the entrance lowered his phone slightly, pretending not to record. A teller behind the counter froze mid-motion, her polite smile fading into uncertainty. Somewhere in the distance, a printer continued to hum, oblivious to the shift unfolding in the room. "We've received a report of fraudulent activity tied to your account," Daniel continued, his tone tightening just enough to signal control, but not enough to sound unsure. "I'm going to need you to cooperate." Monica's eyes met his, calm and steady, the kind of calm that didn't come from ignorance, but from something deeper, something quieter. Imagine standing there, surrounded by strangers, every glance carrying a question you didn't ask for, every whisper shaping a story you didn't tell. She could feel it, the weight of assumption pressing in from every direction, subtle but undeniable. Still, she said nothing. That silence seemed to irritate him more than any argument could have. Daniel stepped closer, closing the distance by a few feet, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. "I asked you a question," he said, louder now, enough for the room to fully commit its attention. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone shifted. Someone else shook their head. And just like that, the narrative had begun to form without her. But Monica didn't react. Her breathing remained even. Her gaze never broke. Because what no one in that room understood, what Officer Hayes couldn't possibly see, was that this moment, this accusation, this carefully built tension, it wasn't catching her off guard. It was walking straight into something far bigger than itself. Daniel reached forward, his hand hovering near her bag, hesitation flickering for just a fraction of a second before disappearing beneath habit. "If you have nothing to hide," he said, "this won't be a problem." The room leaned in without realizing it. And somewhere beneath the surface of that silence, something was about to shift. Daniel did not wait for permission this time. His fingers closed around the strap of Monica's bag with a confidence that came from years of never being challenged, and he pulled it forward just enough to assert control without appearing reckless. The leather shifted slightly under his grip, the soft creak barely audible beneath the growing tension in the room. Monica's hand remained at her side. She did not resist. She did not step back. She simply watched him, her expression unchanged, as if she were observing something inevitable rather than unexpected. The crowd leaned closer, drawn in by the silent gravity of the moment. A man near the teller counter folded his arms, his eyes narrowing with quiet judgment. A woman by the entrance whispered something under her breath, her tone low but unmistakably certain. It did not take long for assumptions to fill the space where facts had not yet been spoken. Daniel exhaled slowly, steadying himself as he adjusted his stance, positioning the bag on the counter beside them. The marble surface reflected the overhead lights, casting a cold glow across everything it touched. "We are going to take a look inside," he said, his voice measured, as if rehearsed, as if this was just another routine check in a long line of routine checks. But something about the way Monica stood there made it feel different. Not louder, not dramatic, just different. The kind of difference that did not announce itself, but waited. He unzipped the bag with a quick motion, the sound cutting through the silence more sharply than it should have. For a brief second, no one moved. Even the faint hum of electronics seemed to fade beneath the weight of anticipation. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. A tablet, a slim folder, a wallet placed with precision. No clutter, no panic, no signs of someone trying to hide anything. Daniel paused, just for a fraction of a second, before continuing. He reached for the folder, flipping it open with practiced efficiency, scanning the contents quickly, his eyes moving faster than his thoughts could catch up. Numbers. Documents. Clean. Organized. Too organized. His jaw tightened, not in realization, but in resistance. You have been flagged for suspicious transfers, he said, louder now, as if volume could compensate for uncertainty. Large amounts. Multiple accounts. The words echoed slightly against the high ceilings, bouncing back into the ears of those already convinced. Monica's gaze did not shift. She did not look at the documents. She did not look at the crowd. She looked only at him. Imagine being spoken about like you are not even part of the conversation. Imagine hearing your life reduced to a suspicion, your presence turned into a problem that needs to be solved. Still, she remained silent. And that silence, steady and unbroken, began to do something unexpected. It did not weaken the moment. It stretched it. Daniel reached deeper into the bag, his movements now sharper, less controlled, as if he needed to find something that justified everything he had already set in motion. Around them, the whispers grew just a little louder, just enough to blur into a low, constant murmur. Someone shifted their weight. Someone else leaned in further. The tension did not explode. It tightened. And somewhere beneath that tightening, beneath the polished floors and quiet judgment, the situation was already beginning to move in a direction no one in that room had prepared for. Daniel's fingers slowed as they moved through the contents of the bag, not because he had found something definitive, but because he had not. The absence of chaos inside the bag did not match the story he had already started telling, and that quiet contradiction began to press against his certainty. He flipped through the folder again, this time more carefully, his eyes scanning each page as if the truth might suddenly reveal itself if he just looked harder. But the numbers aligned. The documents were clean. Too clean. A flicker of doubt passed through his expression, subtle enough that most would miss it, but not her. Monica saw it. She saw the moment his confidence hesitated, the moment the narrative he had built began to shift beneath his feet. And still, she said nothing. The silence between them was no longer passive. It had weight now. It had direction. A bank manager, drawn by the growing crowd, stepped cautiously closer, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the floor. He glanced at Daniel, then at Monica, then at the open bag on the counter, his face caught somewhere between concern and calculation. "Officer, is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice careful, measured, the kind of tone used when stepping into something that might already be too far gone. Daniel did not look at him immediately. His attention remained fixed on the documents, as if acknowledging uncertainty would somehow make it real. "We are handling a potential fraud case," he replied, his voice firm, but no longer effortless. "Routine procedure." Routine. The word hung in the air, hollow and unconvincing, because nothing about this felt routine anymore. The manager nodded slowly, though his eyes lingered on Monica longer than before, as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had just heard. She stood there, composed, unshaken, her presence steady in a way that did not match someone caught in wrongdoing. Imagine watching a situation unfold where one person grows louder while the other grows stiller, and somehow the stillness begins to feel more powerful than the noise. That was what was happening now. Daniel reached into the inner pocket of the bag, his movements deliberate, almost cautious this time. His fingers brushed against something small, firm, and precisely placed. He paused, just for a second. Then he pulled it out. A slim, black case. Unmarked. No logos. No obvious purpose. He turned it in his hand, his brow tightening slightly as he examined it. "What is this?" he asked, the question sharper than before, edged with a need for control. Monica's eyes dropped briefly to the object, then returned to his face. For the first time, there was a shift. Not fear. Not panic. Something quieter. Something intentional. The crowd leaned in again, sensing the moment pivoting, though no one could yet name why. Daniel opened the case with a quick motion, expecting something that would confirm everything he had already decided. But what he found inside did not match expectation. It did not match assumption. And for the first time since he had spoken, his voice did not come immediately. The silence stretched. The room held its breath. And in that fragile, suspended moment, the balance of power began to tilt, slowly, almost imperceptibly, away from him. Daniel did not speak right away. His eyes stayed fixed on what lay inside the case, but whatever he had expected to find was not there, and that absence began to echo louder than any accusation he had made. The edges of his confidence, once sharp and certain, now felt less defined, like something slowly unraveling under pressure he did not fully understand. The room noticed, not all at once, not in a dramatic shift, but in subtle ways. The whispers softened. The glances changed. People who had leaned forward with judgment now leaned back with uncertainty. Their expressions no longer aligned with the story they had been ready to believe. The bank manager took a step closer, his posture tightening as his eyes flicked toward the open case, then quickly away, as if recognizing something he should not fully acknowledge. "Officer," he said again, more carefully this time, "is there something we should be aware of?" Daniel swallowed, the movement small but visible. He closed the case halfway, then opened it again, as if confirming what he had already seen would somehow change. It did not. His voice, when it came, lacked the edge it carried before. "It is under review," he said, choosing his words slower now, each one placed with caution instead of force. Under review. Another phrase that sounded controlled on the surface but hollow underneath. Monica watched him without interruption, her presence steady, her silence now unmistakably intentional. She was not waiting for permission to speak. She was waiting for the moment to land. Imagine being in a room where everything has already been decided about you, and then watching that decision begin to fracture without you saying a single word. That was the shift happening now. Daniel's grip on the case tightened slightly before he set it down on the counter, more gently than before, as if the object itself carried weight beyond its size. His shoulders squared again, an attempt to reclaim the authority that had begun to slip, but something in the room had already changed. The control he thought he held no longer felt absolute. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Monica, his tone more restrained, "you still need to explain these transactions." It was an attempt to regain ground, to pull the moment back into something familiar, something procedural. But even as he spoke, the words did not carry the same force. Because now, the question was no longer just about her. It was about him, about what he had started, about what he might not be able to finish. Monica's gaze remained locked on his, calm and unwavering, but there was something new in her eyes now. Not emotion, not reaction, recognition, as if she had reached the exact point she had been waiting for all along. The air felt tighter, heavier, as though the room itself understood that something irreversible was about to unfold. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the smallest sounds seemed distant, muted beneath the tension pulling everything inward. And then, without raising her voice, without shifting her stance, Monica moved her hand toward the counter, toward the case he had just set down, not with urgency, not with hesitation, but with the quiet precision of someone who knew exactly what came next. And in that moment, the story everyone thought they were watching began to turn into something else entirely. Monica's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the case for just a moment, not rushing, not hesitating, as if she were allowing the weight of the silence to settle before she moved any further. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, she turned it toward herself and opened it fully, revealing its contents to the space between them rather than hiding it from view. Daniel's eyes followed the movement, sharper now, searching for something he could anchor himself to, something that would restore the control he had begun to lose. But the longer he looked, the less certain he became, because what lay inside was not loud, not dramatic, not immediately explosive. It was precise, structured, official in a way that did not need to announce itself. A small identification wallet, a series of neatly aligned credentials, and beneath them, a slim metallic badge, partially visible, catching just enough light to draw attention without demanding it. The room did not react right away. There was no gasp, no sudden shift, just a subtle tightening of awareness, like a collective breath being held without anyone realizing it. Daniel's posture stiffened slightly, his shoulders pulling back as if preparing to challenge what he was seeing, but his hands did not move forward this time. They stayed where they were, suspended between action and hesitation. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said, though his voice no longer carried the same certainty. It was controlled, but thinner now, stretched over something unsteady. Monica lifted her eyes to meet his again, calm as ever, but there was something unmistakable in her gaze now. Not defiance, not anger, authority, quiet, unspoken, but absolute. Imagine realizing, in the middle of asserting control, that the situation you thought you understood has layers you never considered, and that every step you took forward may have been a step in the wrong direction. That realization does not arrive all at once. It builds. Slowly. Relentlessly. Daniel felt it now, even if he could not fully name it. The bank manager shifted beside them, his earlier caution now replaced with something closer to concern. His eyes flickered once more toward the open case, and this time, he did not look away as quickly. Something in his expression changed, a recognition that came too late to prevent what had already unfolded. "Officer Hayes," he said quietly, using his name for the first time. "Perhaps we should—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The implication hung there, clear enough for anyone paying attention. Daniel exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath, as if recalibrating, as if trying to gather the pieces of a situation that was no longer moving in a straight line. "Ma'am," he said again, but this time the word carried less command and more caution. "If you have something to present, now would be the time." It was not a demand anymore. It was an opening. Monica did not respond immediately. She allowed the silence to stretch just a little longer, allowed the weight of every eye in the room to settle on that single moment. Then, with the same steady precision, she reached into the case and lifted the identification wallet, holding it at just the right angle, not thrusting it forward, not hiding it either. Just enough. Just enough for the truth to begin revealing itself. And in that fraction of a second, before a single word was spoken, the balance of power shifted completely, even if Daniel had not yet realized just how far it had already gone. The identification wallet rested between Monica's fingers, steady and unshaken, as she opened it just enough for the details inside to be seen, but not yet fully understood. The motion was calm, controlled, almost understated, but the effect it had on the space around her was immediate, even if no one spoke. Daniel's eyes locked onto it, narrowing slightly as he tried to process what he was looking at, his mind searching for something familiar, something that would allow him to dismiss it, to regain the ground he had lost. But the longer he looked, the more that certainty slipped away. The badge inside was not decorative. It was not symbolic. It carried weight in a way that did not need explanation. The metallic surface caught the overhead light again, reflecting it sharply this time, enough to draw every eye in the room toward it. And beneath that, the lettering. Clear. Official. Unmistakable. For a brief second, Daniel did not move. His posture, once rigid with authority, seemed to pause mid-assertion, like a command that had been interrupted before it could land. "This," he began, but the word did not finish. It lingered in the air, incomplete, as if his voice itself was recalibrating to a reality he had not anticipated. Monica did not raise the badge higher. She did not push it forward. She simply held it there, allowing him to see it for exactly what it was. No more. No less. Imagine standing in a moment where everything you believed you controlled begins to shift, not because of force, not because of confrontation, but because of truth quietly stepping into the light. That was the moment unfolding now. The bank manager took a small step back, his earlier uncertainty now replaced with something closer to alarm, though he tried to mask it behind professionalism. His eyes moved quickly between Monica and Daniel, as if trying to understand how quickly the situation had turned without warning. Around them, the whispers had stopped entirely. The room was silent now, not out of curiosity, but out of realization. Daniel's hand, which had hovered near the counter moments ago, slowly lowered to his side. The movement was subtle, but it carried meaning. Control was no longer his to assert. "Director," he said, the word coming out slower than the others had, as if it required effort to form. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The title itself carried enough weight to shift everything. Monica closed the wallet with a soft, deliberate motion, the click of it snapping shut sounding louder than it should have in the silence. Then she placed it gently on the counter, her eyes never leaving his. "You stopped a federal investigation in progress," she said, her voice even, calm, and unmistakably authoritative. No anger, no raised tone, just fact. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality that no one could ignore. Daniel inhaled sharply, not in panic, but in realization. The kind that arrives too late to prevent what has already happened. His gaze dropped briefly to the counter, to the open bag, to the documents he had so confidently questioned just minutes before. And in that brief glance, everything connected. The transactions, the organization, the precision. It had never been random. It had never been suspicious in the way he had assumed. It had been something else entirely. Something structured. Something intentional. Something far beyond his initial accusation. When he looked back up, the room felt different. Smaller. Quieter. And for the first time since he had spoken, he did not look like the one in control. Because now, the truth was no longer hidden. And it did not need to be forced. It had already done what it came to do. The word director did not fade when it left his mouth. It lingered, echoing in a way that shifted the entire room without a single additional sound. Daniel stood still, his posture no longer rigid but recalibrating, as if every instinct he relied on was now being questioned by the reality in front of him. The authority he had carried into the room had not disappeared, but it had been redefined, placed into a hierarchy he had not anticipated. Monica did not move closer. She did not step forward or raise her voice. She simply stood where she was, her presence now filling the space in a way that did not require motion. This operation has been active for 8 months, she continued, her tone steady, each word measured with precision. Every transaction you reviewed is part of a monitored chain connected to a larger investigation. The bank manager's breath caught slightly, subtle but noticeable, as he shifted his stance again, his earlier composure now replaced with a quiet urgency. His eyes moved quickly toward the counters, toward the offices behind the glass partitions, as if the walls themselves might suddenly hold meaning they did not before. Daniel's jaw tightened, not in defiance, but in realization. I was responding to a report, he said, his voice lower now, controlled but no longer commanding. It was an explanation, not a declaration. Monica nodded once, acknowledging the statement without validating it. And in doing so, she replied, you compromised surveillance, interrupted data collection, and alerted individuals who were not supposed to know they were being observed. The words did not come with accusation. They came with clarity. And that clarity settled heavier than any raised voice ever could. Imagine realizing that a moment you believed was routine was, in fact, a turning point, and that every action you took inside it carried consequences far beyond what you could see. That realization does not shout. It sinks in, slowly, completely. Around them, the stillness had transformed. It was no longer curiosity holding the room in place. It was understanding. A teller behind the counter lowered her gaze, suddenly aware that she had been watching something far more serious than she had first assumed. The man near the entrance quietly slipped his phone back into his pocket, no longer interested in recording what he did not fully comprehend. Daniel glanced toward the bag again, toward the documents he had handled so casually, and this time, he saw them differently, not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as pieces of something structured, something deliberate, something that had been unfolding long before he arrived. If there is an active investigation, he said carefully, choosing each word with far more caution than before, why was there no notification? Monica's gaze did not waver. Because the people involved were not supposed to know, she answered simply. The response was not defensive. It was factual, final, the kind of answer that did not invite further challenge. Daniel's shoulders lowered slightly, the shift subtle but significant. The room, once shaped by his presence, now responded to hers. And for the first time since the moment began, he did not attempt to take control back. Because now, control was no longer something he could claim. It was something he had already stepped into without realizing it, and something that had already moved beyond him. Monica reached for the folder on the counter, closing it with the same quiet precision she had shown from the beginning, restoring order not just to the items in front of her, but to the situation itself. And in that simple motion, the message became clear to everyone watching. This moment was never hers to lose. It was his to misunderstand. The shift did not arrive with noise. It arrived with movement. Subtle at first, then undeniable. The glass doors at the front of the bank opened again, but this time, no one looked away. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, followed by a woman carrying a slim folder against her side, her pace measured, her eyes scanning the room with quiet precision. They did not rush. They did not speak loudly. They did not need to. The presence alone was enough. The bank manager straightened immediately, his posture snapping into a formality that had not been there moments before. His eyes moved from Monica to the incoming figures, and in that instant, recognition replaced uncertainty. Daniel noticed it too. The way the room adjusted. The way attention shifted without being asked. He turned slightly, just enough to see them approach, his expression tightening as the situation continued to unfold beyond his control. The lead agent stopped a few feet from Monica, giving a small, respectful nod. No words were exchanged between them at first, but the understanding was immediate, practiced, precise. "We are in position," the agent said quietly, his voice low but clear enough to carry weight. Monica gave a single nod in return, her gaze steady, her presence unchanged. It was not a dramatic exchange. It did not need to be, because everything that followed made the meaning unmistakable. The woman with the folder stepped forward, placing it gently on the counter where Daniel had stood moments before. She opened it with the same controlled precision Monica had shown earlier, revealing documents that were far more detailed than anything he had reviewed. Account connections, names, timelines, patterns that stretched far beyond a single transaction. The bank manager leaned in slightly, his face draining of the last traces of doubt as the structure of the situation became clear. This was not suspicion. This was not confusion. This was design. Daniel's eyes moved across the pages, slower now, more carefully, as if each line carried a weight he had not been prepared to hold. The earlier confidence that had guided his actions was gone, replaced by something quieter. Awareness. "These accounts," the agent continued, glancing briefly at Daniel before returning his focus to Monica, "have been flagged across multiple states. The coordination is deeper than expected." Monica closed her eyes for just a brief moment, not in frustration, not in relief, but in calculation. Then she opened them again, sharper now, fully aligned with what was unfolding. "Secure the internal records," she said, her voice calm, direct, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "No alerts. No disruptions." The agents moved immediately, not with urgency, but with efficiency, dispersing into positions that had clearly been planned long before this moment. The room responded without being told. Employees stepped back. Conversations stopped. Even the quiet hum of routine activity seemed to recede in the presence of something larger taking shape. Daniel remained where he was, standing just off to the side now, no longer the center of the scene, but not removed from it either. He watched as the operation continued around him, every movement precise, every action connected, every piece fitting into something he had interrupted without understanding. Imagine realizing that what you thought was a single moment was actually part of a much larger sequence, and that your role in it was never what you believed it to be. That realization does not come with a warning. It arrives all at once, reshaping everything that came before it. Monica turned slightly, her attention shifting back to him for the first time since the agents entered. She did not look at him with anger. She did not look at him with judgment. She looked at him with clarity, and that clarity said everything that needed to be understood. Without raising her voice, without stepping closer, she spoke one final time. This was never about a transaction. The words settled into the space between them, quiet but final. And in that moment, there was nothing left for him to question, because the truth had already moved past him, already taken form, already begun to do what it came to do. The bank no longer sounded the way it had before. The quiet hum of machines, the soft shuffle of paperwork, the distant murmur of routine conversation had all been replaced by something else. Not chaos, not fear, just a heavy, deliberate silence that followed the truth as it settled into every corner of the room. People did not speak because they understood. They did not move because they were watching something larger than themselves unfold in real time. Daniel Hayes stood still, not frozen, but grounded in a reality he could no longer redirect. His eyes followed the agents as they worked with calm precision, gathering information, coordinating quietly, moving through the space as if they had always been part of it. No raised voices, no sudden gestures, just control, the kind of control that does not need to prove itself. He glanced once more at the counter where Monica had stood, at the place where he had laid out his assumptions so confidently just minutes ago. It looked the same. The marble still reflected the light. The documents were still neatly aligned. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Imagine realizing that the moment you thought defined someone else was, in fact, revealing you. Not through confrontation, not through force, but through the quiet exposure of truth. That realization does not leave room for argument. It does not offer an escape. It simply stays. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing not because the situation had resolved in his favor, but because resistance no longer made sense. He had stepped into something he did not understand, and now he stood inside its consequences. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. Monica gathered her belongings with the same steady precision she had shown from the beginning, placing each item back into her bag without hurry, without hesitation. There was no rush in her movements, no need to reclaim anything. She had never lost control. She had never needed to take it back. It had always been hers. As she closed the bag, the sound was soft, final in a way that did not demand attention but commanded it anyway. The agents had already moved into their positions, the investigation continuing beyond the moment that had brought everything into focus. This was not an ending. It was a continuation, the kind that does not pause for misunderstanding. Monica turned slightly, her gaze passing over the room one last time, not searching, not judging, simply acknowledging what had happened. Then her eyes met Daniel's again. For a brief second, the space between them held everything that had unfolded. The accusation, the silence, the shift, the truth. She did not speak immediately. She did not need to, because some moments are not defined by what is said, but by what is understood. And when she did speak, her voice was calm, even, carrying no trace of anger, only clarity. "The badge does not make you right," she said quietly. "It only shows who you chose to be while wearing it." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled exactly where they were meant to, leaving no room for confusion. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer, then lowered his eyes, not in defeat, but in recognition. Around them, the world began to move again, slowly at first, then naturally, as if the pause had ended and time had resumed its course. But something had changed, not just in the room, not just in him, in the understanding of what power truly looked like. Monica adjusted her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit, her steps measured, steady, leaving behind a space that felt different simply because she had stood in it. And as the doors opened and closed behind her, the final truth lingered in the air, quiet and unshakable. He thought he was the law, but that day, the law had a different voice, and it never needed to raise itself to be heard.